Today, we are focusing on Ivory Coast, where the power struggle is reopening old wounds. At 80 years of age, Laurent Gbagbo, who was once forced from office, has returned to the political arena, rallying thousands against President Alassane Ouattara's controversial bid for a fourth term. This is The Conversation. I'm Darshan Usman. Let's talk. 2016, Ouattara's changed the Ivory Coast constitution, resetting the presidential limit to allow himself to stand for a third term in office in the 2020 polls. Fast forward to July 2025, where he announced his candidacy, saying both his health and the constitution, that's the country's constitution, allowed him to serve a fourth term. Now, on that note, former President Laurent Gbagbo led big rallies in Abidjan, asking people to oppose President Alassane Ouattara's bid for a fourth term, saying that the move is unconstitutional, and several top opposition figures, including Gbagbo himself, have been barred from running. Many Ivorians worry that the exclusion of rivals and recent arrests of activists could lead to unrest, while Ouattara says his experience is needed because the country faces security and economic challenges. Now, today on The Conversation, I'm joined by a few very good gentlemen. We have Thamsanq Zhu, who's an African Affairs analyst, and we also have Dr. David Matanga, who is also an African Affairs analyst. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for inviting us. Sorry.
All right, so let's begin with Thamsanq. Now, from a constitutional perspective, how convincing is President Ouattara's argument that the 2016 charter,
well, what you are asking is a political question. Legally, it really is moot because he contested in 2020 using that same provision. And because he's in control, he can get the courts to clear it. Because what he simply said, the argument he used in 2020 was that the 2016 constitution had reset the two-term limits, and what he had done since 2011 didn't count. So we can argue, but where a political decision is made by those that are incumbent, it tends to be difficult to reverse it. So the law is as good as it's being applied, and until such a time when there is a change or there's a different decision from the courts, that's what stands. But of course, you also have to remember, Darshan, that President Ouattara will say himself that for many years, during the Gbagbo years and probably the Laurent Gbagbo years, he was barred himself by virtue of persons of, the parentage, the origins of his parents, and, people saying he's from Burkina Faso rather than Cote d'Ivoire. So this is where we are. For me, it really doesn't matter what the interpretation of that constitutional provision could be. He stood in the last election for what became his third term, and he should be able to stand now.
All right, now just before we come to Dr. Matanga, still on you, Thamsanq, what do you see as the real motive behind him barring, other people, and especially figures like former President Laurent Gbagbo and Tijani Thiam as well?
Right. What tends to happen? Power is nice. Power is nice, and sometimes when you are in power, there are a lot of people then who have vested interest in you remaining in power. It could be the people around him in government. It could be maybe foreign interests. But there definitely will be people. There are many people who say that he is very close to Paris. That is not lost on those, how he came to power. Remember 2010, 2011, that difficult time against Laurent Gbagbo in those elections. Tanks rolled into Cote d'Ivoire. He doesn't forget the people that helped him to come to power at that point. He would then argue that after the unfortunate passing on of Coulibaly, that he probably is the best candidate from his camp to continue and probably who can win. Remember what happened in the US with former President Joe Biden?
Yeah.
People around him saying he's the one who had the best chance to beat President Donald Trump rather than Kamala Harris, although they knew that it was difficult for him to save once he won the election. So it could be that kind of arrangement where they say from his party, from his camp, from those that are interested in keeping hold of the power, he is their best candidate to win against those that are being supported by Tidjane Thiam and also those that are supported by former President Gbagbo.
All right, so let's come back to Dr. Matanga. Let's have your thoughts on, this whole issue, and if you think that, or if you accept that the Electoral Commission and courts acted impartially, just like some critics have said.
I think the Electoral Commission, there's no Electoral Commission apart from few in Africa that act without bias. One of them is South African, one Senegalese, Ghanaian, Liberian, and a few others, 2 or 3. The rest of the Electoral Commissions in Africa have got a very huge problem, and that's where conflicts come from. But coming back to Ouattara and Gbagbo, this is a repeat of what some of us witnessed. And I was one of the few witnesses in Abidjan with Mbeki and Chisano, trying to see whether we can salvage something before the full-scale war. It did not work. One of the things that most of these African leaders are doing is not understanding what multipartyism is. What do you want from the systems of democracy? If you have accepted competition, if you have accepted 2 terms, if you have accepted to say remove the term limit, then allow others to flow, to come and compete, and you beat them, no problem. That would be no problem. But the worst mistake that Ouattara has done in Ivory Coast is to bar people from taking part. That is a disaster. That is a time bomb. Who will recognize the elections? Remember, the war began on constitutionalism. Who should declare the results and who should ratify the results? That's where the war started. And it started like that. It is again going to come. So for me, I think the whole of the African systems, my sister and my brother, we should go back to a drawing table. Whenever you hear elections in Africa, you start getting worried. This one is a worry for me. I think Ivory Coast could go to another war that we are looking forward.
We're hoping we're hoping it doesn't get to that, and everything hopefully will be sorted out before it gets that bad. But then now let's talk about, the protests that happened, especially on Saturday in Yopougon, which actually drew thousands with chants of "Enough is enough. We do not want a 4th term." Tamsanq, what steps should the state take now to address these protesters' demands? Because we know how violent these kind of protests usually turn. What should the state do to address these protesters' demands, for an inclusive role and also to avoid any form of escalation?
The best thing is to do nothing. The protests are not necessarily for local Ivorians that are voting, that are on the voters' roll. These are protests for the international community and France in particular. Remember, Tidjane Thiam has got a lot of support because he worked in London, in Switzerland, in France. He took French citizenship after, that turbulence when he left. He is a nephew, I believe, to Felix Houphouët-Boigny, the former and maybe the first or founding president, or part of that leadership. So, and Gbagbo, after all those things that happened to him, going to The Hague and coming back and being acquitted, there's a lot of capital. So what these leaders want to show is to show the international community, like what my elder Matanga is saying, that they do have support, that the people of Ivory Coast no longer want to have President Ouattara continuing, so that if there's a disputed election, they can continue with that momentum because they have already shown with the numbers that are coming to the street. So these are numbers, Dashon, that are for the international optics to justify that they actually have the support that could change the court's decision. And maybe some of those candidates might end up actually being brought back onto the ballot papers. Dashon?
All right, now let's hear from Dr. Matanga as well. Dr. Matanga, in your view, are we looking at a broad popular movement, or mainly party loyalists, who are mobilized by Gbagbo's camp?
First of all, all of you, let me tell you the truth. This man has knocked his friends because he says they have dual citizenship. But he himself, as my brother knows, he's doubted. He's not even from Ivory Coast. That is one point. The second point, this is a mobilization, not external. This is an internal mobilization. If you look at the war of 2010, 2011, I was there. It again started the way it is. Ouattara refused to acknowledge the results, refused the constitutional court to announce any results. He said they will not accept the results. So if any analyst looking at the situation of Ivory Coast, thinking it is going to be a good sunshine after the voting, it is not going to be. Whether it is internal or external, the man has already spoiled the move by eliminating people whom should have been allowed in political science. He should have allowed them to come on the ballot paper. If he's popular, and he said the constitution allows him, knock them off through the ballot. But now when you tell people, like what Macky Sall did in Senegal, to knock these two men out until 2 weeks, I was in television trying to plead for them to be released. This is another repeat of what happened in 2010, 2011. I was there and I'm seeing it here. The pattern is still the same. It's not outside support. It is still the same. Ouattara is supported by France. We know it. It is quite, that's his base. And the other gentleman also is a French mole. So here we are. What is going to happen today? Two elephants fighting, the grass suffers.
All right, so
it is coming.
Okay, so Tapsank, Dr. Matanga gave an example of, an incident that happened in the past. It made me remember, something that happened in Cote d'Ivoire during the 2010-2011 post-election crisis. How do these developments, I'm talking about the protests still, how do they compare to, the crisis of 2010-2011, which left nearly 3,000 people dead? Do you see the same risk factors emerging, or do you think that these institutions have matured since then?
Well, the world has changed. Things have moved on. And I think what happened in Senegal is already an indication that the sitting government there and Macky Sall's replacement or appointed person lost the election to Bassirou Faye. But Bassirou Faye himself had just come in as a replacement for Sanku because he had been barred from participating in that election. So I see a scenario where that momentum is likely to be in Ivory Coast now. Not so much of the fighting that we saw in 2000, maybe 2010 and 2011, but more to say, this is why I was saying this is a spectacle for the international community. France is isolated in ECOWAS and in the region because of what has happened in other countries, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali, and also what's happening in other areas. So Paris doesn't seem to have that influence, and Ivory Coast is isolated in this case. I agree with many that say President Ouattara might have made a miscalculation. He could have simply allowed Tidjane Thiam to stand, or even Laurent Gbagbo to stand. They are coming from different parties. But now what he has done is bring them together, and they are likely to field one candidate against him. And they could be, or he could be forced to reverse that ban, especially Thiam's ban, because definitely, I mean, everyone knows that he's Ivorian. He was a minister. You know, he's a nephew of the founding president. He only took up French citizenship because there were problems back home. Or even then, he continued to be an envoy, an advocate, an ambassador for Ivory Coast. So Cote d'Ivoire is known for a lot of things that Tidjane Thiam did himself when he was wearing that flag on his shoulder. So in this case, I don't think he will go to the conflict of 2010 and 2000, but there could be this political momentum now that many people will come together and realize that it's easy for them to topple the government, or at least have an election that they can dispute and continue, and President Ouattara's party will be under so much pressure they will probably relinquish.
Okay. So I'm being told that we have yet another guest, Dr. Abubakar Ba. He's Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University. Thank you so much, Dr. Ba, for joining us on the show.
Me.
All right, so let's hear your thoughts, on all of this. Do you think, just like Msank has actually said, that President Ouattara made a miscalculation by barring Thiam and Gbagbo?
Well, I guess I'm just joining the conversation. I didn't actually know where it started, but I think it's more than a miscalculation. In many ways, I mean, I consider Ouattara here to be a really very big shame. I'm sorry to say that on TV, but there are two kinds of situations you see in Africa where you have presidents misbehave. The one is actually those who come to power, and somehow don't want to leave or don't follow the rules and so forth. But there's another level, and in the case of Ouattara, this is somebody who actually fought against everything that he's doing now, some 15, 20 years ago. So it's really pathetic that to see somebody who has actually been fighting for a democracy, for fair application of rule of law, actually being the person who subverts that. So I think it's more than a miscalculation here. I'm not too sure whether, the opposition will be able to remove him or not, because again, typically when people come to the presidency, they amass weapons, they control the military, and they are not really, I guess, shy to use it. So it may take more, to do that. But certainly, I mean, I think as a person, I think he's really like, I guess he has taken himself to the book of shame, so to speak, in African politics and African presidencies, in my view.
Okay. Now, Dr. Ba, still on you. You talked about, political repression, and, some have actually argued that the arrests of 6 PPA-CI members, reflect a shrinking civic space. In this case, because I know it's actually similar to so many countries that have actually spoken about whose presidents want to run for another term. Do you think that those who have been detained will be granted speedy judicial review in the case of Ivory Coast?
When the system is broken, I think, I think it's important to understand that whatever kind of judicial review they get, we know the outcome. That is to say, some kind of kangaroo court or some kind of judge is going to say, well, they are guilty and so forth, or they will make some political bargain and release them. So I think when the system is actually not credible to begin with, it defeats there's already no point in that. But I think you have to understand it like this. for somebody who is actually willing to violate, the basic principles of democratic rule, changing constitutions, over and over, for them to actually continue to be in power, you can tell that they will not relinquish it, and they will do all kinds of shenanigans, all kinds of things to somehow pretend that they are playing by the rule of law. No, there is no reason for those people to be detained to begin with. If actually somebody should be detained in Ivory Coast, maybe it's Ouattara, because he has his hands in war, just like all other people and atrocities. Of course, it was a war. They forgive and everything. So, it's the rules.
Okay, now let's come back to you, Dr. Matsanga. Now, looking at Ouattara's record, Cote d'Ivoire has had one of West Africa's fastest growing economies, yet rural poverty and youth unemployment remains high. How much does this economic divide feed this political anger?
It is creating the political anger that you see in most of the West African states, especially when you have a neighbor like a Burkina Faso, which has got 800 ambulances, when your place has one ambulance or none. Therefore, when you talk about one of the most developed economies, it is the elite, the small group. Professor will tell you is the high echelon of elite in Ivory Coast who are enjoying, but most of the people are poor. The gap between the rich and the poor is so huge in Ivory Coast. It used to be one of the best cities in the world. Most of you who might not have gone there or who are growing now, this was the headquarters of African Development Bank. This was one of the cities where you could go and keep quiet. Some of us went there a long time ago in the 80s. But look at the scenario. People are upset. People have reached a state of despondency. The professor of sociology will tell you, when a man has reached a state of despondency, he doesn't go back. He keeps on going. And you must create environment that will stop that despondency. So I'm seeing a problem here that Ouattara, instead of saying, okay, come back on the ballot, let's postpone the elections for a few months, prepare yourselves, let me defeat you. He's not doing that. He continues to chase bump because he has got some backing of some few French mercenaries or French people that have actually who propelled him in 2010. We propelled him and took his friend Gbagbo to ICC. The ICC I hate so much. I don't want to talk about it here. I stood out in ICC to fight for Gbagbo. And I'm not very pleased to see Gbagbo coming back in this scene. He should have kept quiet for some time. Because some of us suffered for him to be out. So, my sister, people are poor. A state of despondence has crept in Ivory Coast. It is not business as usual. If this election is not well conducted, it could light a fire that we might not see, we might not stop at all.
All right, Thank yourself and Dr. Matsanga did say that, President Ouattara should have just stayed rather than contest for a fourth term. And still talking about the economy, some critics have actually said that economic growth under Ouattara has not reached rural youth and cocoa producers as well. Do you think that a fourth term materially will improve living standards in the next 5 years, with measurable targets?
I don't think so. I think Dr. Matsanga is right, because Ivory Coast is rural enough. Think Nigeria, think cities. So you've got Abidjan, you've got the financial institutions, you've got the Africa Development Bank, you've got a lot of things. President Ouattara is a former banker. Of course, we might talk about Tijani as well, but by and large, there has been economic growth in terms of GDP, but this does not necessarily translate to the living standards of people in different areas. but also because of its history. Cote d'Ivoire is, the voting patterns are so ethnic because of the issues of the past. So people like Laurent Gbagbo do have support that can be sustained in certain areas. So will President Ouattara. There are people that will always support him, whether he chooses to continue or to allow somebody else to do, but he has now decided to continue. But the danger is that, once you divide a country politically, it then becomes difficult to make sure that development reaches those areas that are not voting for you, or those people that say they don't want to see you in power. So that is the danger that Cote d'Ivoire or President Ouattara will face. The economy in a capitalist state will never be equal. It is about the opportunities. Do you have the laws that can make sure that everyone has equal opportunities to whatever that 6% GDP growth will bring? But that is very, very unusual. So I don't think that will continue. There are tariffs now. Africa is a different place. The neighbors are different. France is going to trade very carefully. They will look at this and think, if the election doesn't happen in October, will the army come in and take over? There are so many dynamics. So I don't think that economically his fourth term will make much difference.
Okay. Now let's quickly take a break now. When we come back, Dr. Ba, we would love to hear your thoughts, on the upcoming elections, and if you think, what you actually think in general about this upcoming elections that is scheduled for 25th of October 2025. I will take a break now. We'll be back in a bit. Stay with us.